All right, time to get on my little soapbox, I guess, because I have no one to really talk to this about or complain to this about. And it appears that everybody that I talk to is inflicted with apathy, which is probably one of the worst things to really have at this moment, because apathy is one of the largest tools that authoritarian powers are going to exploit and attempt to use to basically consolidate and normalize what it is that they're doing today. And with that's just a broader context of what I wanted to kind of talk about on my little soapbox here. But I just wanted to focus on a big issue that I've been noticing, which is market concerns, which is a very broad term in general. Broad. What I mean by market concerns are we're heading into a recession. It's apparent that we're not going to be able to sustain the current economic growth, and we're probably going to actively shrink in a lot of places. However, it's not hitting those that it should impact, and it's impacting those that can't sustain it. So, prime examples of that is during a recession movement, whenever there's a big transfer of wealth, right? There's a big opportunity to buy in and gain more power, consolidate more power. A prime example of this is going to be like in 2008, when there was that big recession that hit right as Obama came into office. Um, those banks essentially bought up all the smaller banks that were failing because they couldn't last that recession. They couldn't keep going through that pain. And of course, they can because they have a much larger treasury that they have access to, right? So whenever there's recessions or whenever there's economic downturns like this, there's an opportunity for those to consolidate more power and get an even bigger clientele base by just basically buying up all these little businesses, mom and pop shops that can't afford to keep going through that pain. So the longer that the pain lasts, the longer that that recession lasts, the more power is going to be consolidated to those that already had a bunch of power to begin with. Because in a capitalist system, it's those that have capital that can basically dictate and create power for themselves or for others. And in most cases, we do it for ourselves. And as much as we're hoping that some philanthropist, billionaire, or millionaire is going to come and save us, that's just not the reality. These people are going to keep consolidating more power and keep gaining more power for themselves. That's just how these companies are grown to become because they're expected to continue to grow so that they can keep making their stockholders more money. And the stockholders are mainly people who a lot of times you could call them unemployed, really. They don't do shit except for just rely on their stocks to just keep them afloat. You know what I mean? They can just sell and get rid of liquid stocks whenever they want, and they can just keep their current lifestyle going. Which is a whole different little can of worms that I kind of want to get into one day, where it's essentially rich people living off of credit just because who they are and what they hold, even though it's not liquid, right? Like when we look at, for example, Jeff Bezos or something like that, they're worth billions of dollars, right? But that's not their liquid assets, right? That's not how much they have disposable. And if they were to sell those giant assets or those big assets, they would take a big downturn in their overall value. So realistically, people who are considered billionaires, millionaires, if they were to just get rid of all of their assets, they'd be down to a very limited percentage of what they can spend. Um, Anywho, my main point is that the current administration is controlled mainly by corporate power, and I don't think that's very disagreeable. I mean, if you look at the actual policies that they're in placing, it's really just there to benefit lobbyists and those who paid for lobbyists to get their policies across. And most of the times, the policies that they're pushing for are bailouts, continued growth for or continued assistance for businesses that really don't need it. They kind of get in the ears of politicians so that they can do no bid contracts, which in my opinion is fucking ridiculous. I mean, that a public contract is just privatized essentially. Um, based on on who gives them money. Like I understand that I understand nepotism to a certain extent, right? Nepotism being you give people that you know positions of power because you know them, and so you could think of them as more reliable, right? It's better to hire somebody that you know than a stranger because the stranger has multiple different variables that you're unsure of or unaware of, right? It's kind of the idea of it's better to go with the devil you know than the devil you don't, right? But what's happening is that because of nepotism, we're now placing people in positions of power that don't directly deserve it and are, in fact, the antithesis of what that position should be doing, right? Prime example right now, the education department of the United States is essentially null and void. That's the purpose of this last administration has been to try to take out these public institutions and privatize them as much as possible. Um, that way, people get the idea that the system itself isn't working, blames it on the system, and not those manipulating the system to make it worse for those now engaged in it. Right? Which is why I say apathy, which is why I said originally, apathy is one of the worst tools, or one of the best tools, I should say, that is being inflicted by these powers by kind of making you go, it's normal. What are you talking about? We've been through this before. This is fine when it's not, right? If you look at the actual data, you can see the discrepancy of power and wealth in between the common folk and a small percentage of people that are essentially just an elite class of individuals that are in the section of too big to fail kind of section of people, right? They're always needed because of what assets they hold. So we always have to basically kiss their ass, coddle them, work with them as much as possible so that the government doesn't get screwed. But at the end of the day, the government has a lot more power than these corporations, right? It's just that the government has been inflicted and infected by these corporations and has essentially taken it over and has extended their arms of reach via the government, which is a very scary thought, especially because of what the government can do, right? The idea is that we provide government or we give over a lot of rights to government in exchange for some sort of safety, which people are always going to quote, if you give up any of your rights for safety, you deserve neither, right? I forgot who that quote is, but that dude's a fucking idiot, right? And let me tell you why. We clearly have times where we understand we have to give up certain things in order to essentially have a peace amongst the group, right? Prime example, I like to smoke, right? Smoking is not good. You can get secondhand smoke, right? So I understand in a public setting, if surrounded by people in a dense environment, I'm not gonna smoke. As much as I like it, as much as I want to, I'm not gonna do it, right? Because I'm in front of a bunch of people and it's gonna disturb them. Now, if there's a little secret corner, a little hidden corner where I can go and smoke, that's where I go do that, right? But that's not what's happening. What's basically happening is the cigarette company bought the government, and now the government is coming over and smoking right in my fucking face just to get me hooked onto it. That's essentially just for the private corporation that's manipulating that government. You know what I mean? That's essentially what's happening. The cigarette company buys the government, the government now comes over, smokes in my fucking face, tells me to go fuck myself, get cancer, go figure it out. Also, cool little products that might help you, that might like help you out, a couple of goods and services provided by the same ones that are creating the problem to slightly alleviate your problem. You know what I mean? That's essentially what's happening, and it's fucked. Like across the board, we're just fucked. With that being said, we are moving more and more into an authoritarian regime, and slowly we will become a kakistocracy, right? Not a kakistocracy, as much as Redditors and 4chaners would like a kakistocracy. That being a system who purposely puts people in positions of power to be corrupt, to be extremely loyal to corporate powers, to those who already have power. So they're going to seek people who are going to just maintain loyalty and not worry about ethics. Not necessarily concerned with somebody who's good at the job, but somebody who will fill the job and do what is being told to do, right? And so and a big push on this is to miseducate and misinform the public, which is why they're heading so heavily into taking down the Department of Education, taking down the EPA and other institutions that generally benefit us. There was one other institution that they shut down, basically, which I thought was ridiculous, because it was actively helping actively helping people by seeking corruption when it comes to business and things of that sort. So it's kind of obvious in which direction we're heading into right now. And it is concerning, and that's why I say we were kind of fucked, and it is kind of fucked across the board, because they have been putting their chess pieces in all the right places, essentially, to consolidate that power. And the only way that I can really think about doing anything or changing anything, right, as just a single guy, is just letting people know about what's happening. Like, I'm sure a lot of you guys are smart, a lot of you are aware about what's going on, but it's really important to have these conversations with as many people as possible, so that they understand what they're voting for or what they're not voting for. All right, because there's 1/3 of this country who does not vote at all, because they do not feel that either that their interests are being met by government, or they just don't have the time, or they're just not interested. But politics is all around you. To those that say, "Oh, I don't like to get into politics," you're a beneficiary of the current status quo. So of course you don't really care to talk about the politics. But once it starts affecting you, once the rules, once the relationships of how these people are now engaging with you start changing and start actively negatively affecting you, then you're going to have to get in politics. And at that point, you're not really going to have a choice, right? You don't have a choice now, in my opinion. You're always going to be affected by politics, whether or not you decide to engage with it or not decide to engage with it. And when you don't engage with it, you have less say as to how that system is going to end up leading to, right? And as much as I like to think and say that and rant that the system is broken and that it needs to be torn down, the problem isn't a government system. The problem is the people that get put into those positions of power and how we ended up getting to that, right? So I have a lot more that I want to talk about. My brain's kind of scatterbrained and shit, and going all over the place. But my main gripe is that we need to really have these conversations with people, so that they really understand the consequences of acting or not acting, right? Acting in either in a wrong way, or in a reactionary way, or to those that refuse to get involved. Period. And it's become very taboo to have conversations about these really important topics, and I think it's done like that by purpose. You know, like, you're not really allowed to talk about your salary. You're not really allowed to talk about your health and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of these things are very taboo to be able to talk to different people. And I don't think it should be that way. I think there should be more expression. I think there should be more openness, more transparency, especially via the government, right? That way we can all better understand each other. Because truly, the real friction, what happens is when we don't have an understanding, right? That's when real problems occur, in my opinion, as opposed to these fabricated issues that are being created by those in power because they refuse to solve them, because there's no money in solving that issue, right? There's no money in giving homeless people homes. There's no money in giving everybody health care for these corporations or for these businesses, for these people on an individual level. So they're not actively looking to solve it. They're actively looking to either create a problem that they can sell you the solution, or sell you a slight alleviant to the issue that they're causing. Um, and we really need to change that, guys. We really need to have conversations with families, our friends, our coworkers, or whoever it is, and just kind of really talk to them, figure out where they're at, and, you know, try to convince them to either get active, join a union, do what you got to do to consolidate your own power at home. Because eventually you will lose your power if you're not going to use it. If you don't use it, someone else will. And with that being said, um, yeah, I guess thanks for listening. If you're still watching this shit, still listening, let me know if I'm an idiot down in the comments. I'm gonna get a couple of those. Like, and I know I am a bit of an idiot, right? I don't claim to be this political savant. You know what I mean? That a lot of people like to portray themselves as to gain more authority. But I'm just a regular dude, just thinking about these problems, thinking about how we can solve them, and see how we can get out of this, and really just expressing that somehow. And I really had these thoughts for a while, and I just kind of wanted to put it down on video. You know, on paper. I wrote a little bit. I write policies, things that concern me that I'd like to see, but I really just wanted to get this kind of message out to someone at least. You know, um, and I really appreciate it. So thank you. Hope you have a good rest of your day, night, whatever time you're watching this, and take it easy and try to get active. Thanks.